Have you ever known something to be absolutely true, like felt it deeply, right down your
Oh,
bones?
yeah, absolutely.
But then the second you tried to explain it, you just sounded like a complete lunatic.
Right, yeah. You open your mouth.
You open your mouth, and this profound, crystalline clarity you had in your head just comes out as this flimsy, vague, stammering mess.
It's the worst feeling.
It really is. You watch the person you're talking to just kind of scrunch up their face, and you realize, oh, they think I have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about.
They're looking at you like you're crazy.
Exactly. Well, today we are going to prove that your inability to find the words in those moments is not a failure of your intelligence.
No, not at all.
It is a fundamental failure of language itself, and we are going to use this realization to completely fundamentally redefine a word you probably thought you understood. And that word is faith.
It is an incredibly isolating phenomenon, and it's something, every single person listening has experienced.
Oh, 100%.
But we rarely examine why it actually happens. We just assume, well, I guess I'm just not articulate enough.
Right, we blame ourselves.
Yeah. But today's deep dive is going to require you to step back and question the very foundation of how modern society decides what is quote-unquote true.
And what is considered valid knowledge versus what just gets dismissed as a passing feeling or an imaginary whim.
Exactly.
To do that, we are analyzing a really fascinating stack of sources today. We've got a set of deeply concentrated philosophical notes alongside some really rigorous academic frameworks on epistemology, specifically an abstract titled Faith as Non-Empirical Knowledge.
It's a heavy title, but the concepts are...
The concepts are so incredibly grounded, and the mission here is highly ambitious. We are dismantling all that cultural baggage around the idea of faith.
We really are throwing out the entire concept of blind trust.
Yes. We're exploring a radical reframing. We're going to look at faith as a highly specific, undeniable, and structurally sound form of knowledge. Okay, let's unpack this.
So to really get to the bottom of what faith actually is, we have to start by looking at the incredibly rigid box modern discourse has shoved the concept of knowledge into.
Right. It's a very tight box.
It is. Over the last few centuries, we have collectively decided that for something to be considered true, it must be empirically verifiable.
The empirical monopoly, basically.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
If you can't measure it, test it, and put it in a spreadsheet, society basically says, well, it doesn't exist.
Precisely. And the core argument we are analyzing asserts that modern society has reduced this vast, complex landscape of human understanding exclusively to what can be quantified across multiple observers.
Right. Like if I run an experiment.
I have to be able to hand you my exact methodology.
Exact.
And you have to be able to run that identical experiment in a different lab on a different day and get the exact same numbers. That is the absolute gold standard of empirical knowledge.
And look, I mean, I am entirely on board with that framework when it comes to, say, building airplanes or
developing pharmaceuticals.
Developing pharmaceuticals, yes. Constructing the power grid. We love the scientific method. It is arguably the greatest tool humanity has ever invented for navigating the physical world.
Oh, without a doubt.
The problem isn't the tool itself, right? The problem is that we started using a hammer for absolutely everything, including screws.
And then when the screw doesn't go in right...
we blame the screw.
Yeah, we do. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we really have to understand exactly why empirical science holds this monopoly over our modern psyche in the first place.
Right. How did it get so powerful?
Well, science's authority doesn't actually come from its ability to discover every single possible type of truth in the universe.
Okay.
Its supreme authority comes specifically from its ability to translate knowledge into a shared form.
Shared form.
Yes. It operates purely on the external. It creates this totally neutral territory where two human beings who might have entirely different internal worlds can point to the exact same physical data set and just agree on reality.
And that desire for a shared form, it's incredibly seductive, because it's safe.
It's very safe.
I mean, think about it. Before the scientific revolution, if two people disagreed on the fundamental nature of reality, it usually ended in a war or someone getting excommunicated or
a literal duel in the street.
Exactly. Empirical data gave us a neutral third party. We love things that can be weighed and repeated because it offers this immense psychological comfort.
It removes the terrifying ambiguity of human existence.
Yes. If someone challenges me and I can just point to a bar chart, I win the argument. It's clean, it's objective, and it gives us the illusion of total control.
It is the ultimate conflict resolution mechanism, but really only for the material world.
Right.
And the sources we were looking at warn us that this psychological comfort has come at a massive, often totally invisible cost.
Because it works so well for physics, right?
Exactly. Because this method has been so phenomenally successful at conquering the physical world, society has made a highly dangerous intellectual leap.
We decided it's the only game in town.
We decided that only empirical knowledge is valid. Anything that cannot be captured by that specific methodology is immediately dismissed as irrational.
It's just ungrounded, subjective fantasy.
Which the framework we're studying calls a fundamental category error.
A category error. I love that term. It's like saying, well, if you can't measure a piece of music with a ruler, the music doesn't exist.
Or demanding a mathematical equation to prove why a joke is funny.
Oh, that's a perfect example, because if you dissect a joke to find its empirical components, like the decibel level of the words or the syntax or the historical origin of the vocabulary, you completely kill the humor.
There's nothing funny about a decibel reading.
No. You are applying the completely wrong analytical tools to the phenomena.
And that category error is the critical starting point of this whole deep dive. Because when we enforce empirical constraints on realities that are inherently non-empirical, we don't just misunderstand those realities.
We erase them.
We actively erase a huge portion of the human experience from the realm of valid knowledge.
We literally shrink the universe to fit the limitations of our rulers and our thermometers.
Instead of expanding our epistemology,
Yeah.
our theory of knowledge, to encompass the entire universe, we demand that everything fit into the shared external form, even things that only exist internally.
So if the empirical, the measurable, the testable, the shared external data is just one category of knowledge, we have to flip the coin over.
Right.
Our sources state unequivocally that not all forms of knowledge operate within these empirical constraints. So let's look at the other side, the non-empirical.
The materials provide some very specific, very heavy examples of non-empirical concepts. They point to the reality of God, the experience of love, and the profound recognition of what is deeply good.
Right. And immediately, you can just feel the modern mind bristling at those examples.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you cannot put love in a centrifuge. You cannot measure the atomic weight of goodness.
You can't.
And because of that, empirical logic dictates that love is just, a cocktail of oxytocin and dopamine.
A biochemical illusion.
Yeah, an illusion meant to encourage reproduction. It dictates that goodness is just a subjective social construct. We evolved so we wouldn't murder each other in hunter-gatherer tribes.
It reduces these profound realities to purely mechanical side effects.
But the philosophical framework we are analyzing aggressively pushes back against that reductionism. It states explicitly that non-empirical realities are not vague, empty, or merely biochemical illusions.
They are a distinct category of reality.
And they can be known with absolute clarity, but they are known through a completely different mechanism, right?
Yes. The text explains that non-empirical knowledge is recognized directly through what it calls internal coherence.
Internal coherence.
And direct encounter without requiring any external confirmation whatsoever.
Okay, I want to slow down here and really dig into the mechanics of that, because internal coherence sounds like a phrase that could get very slippery very quickly.
It does sound a bit abstract.
Yeah. What exactly does that mean functionally? How does a human mind measure internal coherence?
Well, think about it as cognitive structural integrity.
Okay.
Empirical knowledge relies on external coherence. Does my data match the physical world? And can a completely independent observer replicate my findings?
Right, the shared form again.
Exactly. Internal coherence, on the other hand, means that the knowledge fits perfectly, undeniably, and structurally within your own internal architecture of understanding.
So it's an inside job.
Completely.
Yeah.
When you experience a direct encounter with a profound sense of purpose or the inherent dignity of another human being, it doesn't just pass through you like a fleeting thought.
It sticks.
It locks into place. It resolves internal contradictions you didn't even know you had. It makes sense of your lived experience in a way that is structurally sound.
Wait, I have a massive problem with that. I have to play the skeptic here for a second.
Please do.
If we throw out the requirement for external proof, doesn't internal coherence just become a fancy academic term for confirmation bias?
That is the classic counterargument.
Because doesn't this framework just, validate absolute delusion?
Yeah.
If someone truly believes the Earth is flat, or if they have a deep internal conviction that they are being stalked by telepathic pigeons.
Telepathic visions, right.
Right. Doesn't that ring true internally to them? How does this framework separate a profound non-empirical truth from a psychiatric episode or a radicalized conspiracy theory?
That is exactly the pushback the empirical framework relies on to maintain its dominance over us. It points to the telepathic pigeons and says, see? This is what happens when you abandon external metrics. It's all just chaos and madness.
And honestly, it's a compelling argument.
It is, until you realize the framework we are looking at draws a very sharp, very precise line here. The limitation is not in the knowing, and the protection against delusion is structural.
Walk me through that structure. How do we actually spot the difference?
Okay, a delusion, or a wild conspiracy theory, inherently attempts to make claims about the empirical world.
Ah,
If you say the Earth is flat or pigeons are telepathic, you are making claims about the shared physical external reality.
right. Geography and biology.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And because you are making claims about the physical reality, your claims must submit to the tools of physical reality.
Which means empirical testing.
Yes. The flat Earth fails the empirical test. Therefore, it is a delusion.
Okay, I see.
But non-empirical knowledge, like the transcendent value of love or the deep moral weight of goodness, does not make claims about physical geography or avian biology.
It operates entirely within the internal, relational, and spiritual domains.
Precisely.
Ah, okay. That is a massive distinction. So if a piece of internal knowledge contradicts demonstrable physical facts, it's just a delusion.
Yes.
But true non-empirical knowledge isn't trying to compete with physics. It's operating in a completely different dimension of human existence.
And within that internal dimension, true non-empirical knowledge is recognized by its structural weight.
Structural weight.
A passing feeling, a whim, or a manic delusion is inherently unstable. It shifts around. It requires constant mental gymnastics to maintain.
You have to keep convincing yourself.
Right. But encountering a deep non-empirical truth has a profound, quiet architecture to it. You don't have to force it. You recognize it structurally.
Yeah.
It organizes your reality rather than fracturing it.
It's the difference between, like, eating a piece of cake because you have a sudden sugar craving, which is just a passing, unstable feeling.
Right.
And looking into the eyes of your child and knowing with absolute terrifying clarity that you would throw yourself in front of a train for them.
Yes. Exactly.
You don't need to run a double-blind study to prove that love exists. You don't need a peer-reviewed paper to confirm it. That knowing isn't a passing feeling. It is a structural pillar of your entire reality.
And this is where the epistemology we're studying really hits its stride. It establishes that this internal verification is a completely valid, entirely distinct mode of knowledge.
It is not a lesser, inferior version of empirical data.
Not at all. It is parallel to it. You use empirical knowledge to navigate the mechanics of the shared external world.
Like how to build the train.
How to calculate its velocity.
Yes.
Yes. And you use non-empirical knowledge for the profound realities of the internal world.
Why you would step in front of that train for your child.
Exactly. Both are required for a complete human epistemology.
Okay, so if we accept this parallel structure, if we validate that non-empirical knowledge is real, that it has deep internal coherence, and that we can know it with absolute clarity, we run headfirst into the most infuriating brick wall of the human condition.
The translation problem.
Yes. This brings us right back to the question I asked at the very beginning of this deep dive. If I know this truth so clearly, why do I sound like a total fool when I try to put it into words?
Because of the limitations of the tools you are forced to use. The framework identifies the exact location of this friction.
And it's not my brain.
The failure is not occurring in your cognition. Your brain isn't misfiring. Your understanding is perfectly intact. The failure is entirely 100% located in the mechanics of language.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because when you look at the mechanics of how we communicate, it is essentially a massive data compression problem.
That's a great analogy.
I want to look at what I'll call the expression gap. The underlying philosophy here points out that all communication depends entirely on shared structures.
Right. Language is a fundamentally empirical external system.
For a word to function, you and I both have to agree on its boundaries in the shared world.
Language operates through shared reference points. If I say the word apple, a very specific image appears in your mind.
Around red fruit.
Exactly. The communication is successful because we both have a shared, external, historical experience of that fruit. The word is just a pointer to the shared external object.
But the sources point out that non-empirical forms of knowledge do not originate in the shared external world.
They originate internally.
They are a direct encounter within your specific consciousness. And because of that, there is no shared physical reference point to point to.
There's no apple.
There's no apple. So when you try to force an infinite, multidimensional internal truth through the extremely narrow, two-dimensional pipeline of vocabulary, you experience a catastrophic loss of data.
It is the ultimate bottleneck. It is exactly like trying to render a highly complex three-dimensional physical object on a flat two-dimensional piece of paper.
Oh, wow.
The mind experiences the 3D reality, the depth, the volume, the weight of the object. But the medium of the paper only allows for height and width.
You literally can't put the depth on the page.
You can draw the object, but you inevitably, structurally, lose an entire dimension in the translation. The person looking at your drawing only sees the flat image.
And the tragedy is that the listener assumes the object has no depth simply because the drawing has no depth.
Yes.
When you take a profound, structure-altering internal revelation and try to translate it into a language built primarily for, navigating, hunting, and gathering, the translation inherently strips away the direct encounter.
It's heavily compressed.
You are handing someone a heavily compressed, low-bitrate MP3 of a live symphony, and then they listen to it on a tiny, terrible speaker and say, well, this doesn't sound very impressive.
That gap, that massive void between knowing something internally and transmitting it externally is the expression gap.
The expression gap.
And the philosophical tragedy that our sources highlight is how modern society reacts to this inevitable loss in translation.
We punish people for it.
We do. When a person attempts to explain a non-empirical truth and fails to provide empirical, easily transmittable proof, society doesn't blame the limitations of language.
No.
It blames the person's intellect.
It is a profound cognitive injustice. Society basically puts you on a witness stand, asks you to describe the color blue to someone who has been blind since birth, and when your words inevitably fail to capture the actual raw experience of the color.
The qualia.
The qualia, exactly. The jury declares that you must not know what blue is. We are constantly punished for the structural limitations of vocabulary, not for a lack of genuine understanding.
And the academic framework explicitly calls out this cruelty. It states that there are vast categories of human experience that a person can intimately understand but cannot ever fully explain.
Because they exceed the shared structures.
Yes. They are too immense, too complex, and too deeply woven into the specific architecture of the individual's consciousness to ever be cleanly exported into a shared linguistic file format.
So we have this aggressively empirical modern world that stands with its arms crossed, demanding testable proof.
Give me the data.
Right. And we have this profound internal world of absolute, undeniable clarity that structurally refuses to be translated into proof. We are all trapped constantly in this expression gap.
We are.
And this exact excruciating friction point, this void between knowing and showing, is exactly where the sources reveal the true foundational definition of our core topic today.
Yes. This is where the concept of faith is actually born.
Okay.
And what is fascinating here is how this framework completely detonates the way modern culture conventionally uses that word.
I mean, if you stop 100 people on the street right now and ask them to define faith, 99 of them will describe it in terms of a cognitive deficit.
They will say it is belief without evidence.
They will call it blind trust.
They frame it as a psychological gamble you are forced to take when you are completely ignorant of the facts.
Right. The cultural narrative is that faith is what you rely on when you run out of knowledge.
Like a spare tire.
Like a backup generator of hope that kicks on only when the power grid of actual verifiable facts shuts down. It's viewed as the opposite of intellect.
But the rigorous epistemology we are studying argues that this cultural definition is not just slightly off, it is fundamentally backwards.
Backwards.
The source material redefines faith not as an absence of data, but as the overwhelming presence of it.
Okay, unpack that.
Faith is the cognitive stance a person takes when they understand something so deeply that it cannot be fully transmitted, tested, or proven to anyone else.
Wow.
It is an active, highly demanding recognition. It is an encounter with absolute understanding.
So what does this all actually mean? It means faith isn't closing your eyes, crossing your fingers, and hoping you picked the right lottery numbers of truth.
Not at all.
Faith is keeping your eyes wide open to an internal reality, even when you know you can never hand that reality over to someone else on a silver platter.
That's exactly it.
It is the immense intellectual courage required to stand by your non-empirical knowledge in a world that relentlessly gaslights you by demanding empirical proof.
That is the exact mechanism. The framework defines faith as alignment with knowledge that does not submit to empirical proof.
Notice the precision of the wording there.
Alignment with knowledge.
Not alignment with a guess.
No. Not alignment with wishful thinking or a tradition you were raised in or a comforting fairy tale. It is alignment with knowledge.
So when you know a deep truth about your ultimate purpose or the spiritual architecture of reality, and you know it with undeniable internal coherence,
But you cannot draw it on a chalkboard for a skeptic.
the act of holding your ground and honoring that truth anyway, that is faith.
It is structurally recognized, internally verified knowledge, enduring the brutal elements of the expression gap.
This is such a massive, empowering paradigm shift. I mean, it elevates the concept of faith from a naive, childlike suspension of disbelief into a highly sophisticated, deeply mature cognitive stance.
It truly is the ultimate form of intellectual boundary setting.
It's a person saying, look, I fully acknowledge the limitations of language and I fully respect the boundaries of the scientific method, but I absolutely refuse to let those external limitations invalidate my direct internal encounter with reality.
It completely restores the dignity of non-empirical human experience. It validates the inner life.
But, and this is a huge but, the abstract doesn't just offer this empowering, elevated definition and leave it there.
No, it immediately follows it with a stark, urgent warning.
Because when a society loses this precise definition of faith, when it forgets that faith is a form of non-empirical knowledge, what rushes in to fill that conceptual void is incredibly destructive.
And this is where we have to look at the severe dangers of misinterpretation. Because the cultural narratives don't just get this wrong accidentally.
Right.
They get it wrong in a way that actively harms people and makes them deeply vulnerable to manipulation.
The framework points out that society often portrays faith as a virtue in the absence of clarity.
We've all heard this.
Oh, yeah. There is this pervasive idea that there is some sort of high moral ground in just blindly accepting things you don't understand.
And that is a highly toxic, deeply dangerous distortion. The text argues that this cultural narrative maliciously confuses ignorance with non-empirical understanding.
We have to pry those two things apart.
We do. Ignorance is simply a lack of information. It is a void.
Right.
Non-empirical understanding, as we've established, is the active presence of profound, structurally recognized internal knowledge.
So when a culture or a leader or an institution teaches that faith means accepting ignorance as a virtue,
They are explicitly telling people to shut off their critical faculties.
they are telling them that questioning is a sin and that blind, unthinking allegiance is holy.
Which strips faith of its entire foundational requirement, internal coherence.
Yes. If true faith is supposed to be in alignment with a truth that deeply rings true inside your own cognitive architecture, but an authority figure tells you that faith means don't ask questions, silence your inner doubts, and just believe what we tell you.
That is a total hijacking of the human operating system.
It's the weaponization of the concept.
It really is. By framing faith as virtuous ignorance, manipulators can entirely bypass your internal coherence detector.
Let's look at how this plays out functionally, because I think this is so important. Imagine a charismatic leader, or a toxic corporate culture, or an abusive partner.
Okay.
They present you with a narrative that clearly contradicts empirical reality or that deeply violates your own internal sense of goodness.
Your alarm bells go off.
Right, you lack internal coherence. But then they deploy the weaponized version of faith. They say, you just need to have faith, stop relying on your own understanding, trust the process.
They make you feel guilty for needing something to make sense.
They frame your very valid cognitive dissonance as a moral failing.
Yes. They say your lack of understanding isn't because their narrative is flawed, but because your faith is weak.
It is the ultimate form of gaslighting.
Precisely. And this is why having a precise epistemological definition is a matter of self-defense.
According to the framework we are analyzing, true faith is never, ever an excuse for ignoring empirical facts in the empirical realm.
Never. If someone says, the structural engineering report says this bridge is going to collapse, but I need you to just have faith that it will hold your weight.
That is not faith.
That is delusion, and it is dangerous.
Faith only applies to the non-empirical.
Exactly. When the term is hijacked to demand compliance in the face of empirical contradiction, it becomes a tool for absolute control.
But the correct definition faith as non-empirical knowledge gives you your agency back.
It arms you.
It does, because if someone demands your blind trust, you can stand on this framework and say, no. True faith requires a direct internal encounter with truth. It requires profound internal coherence.
And I have not had that encounter with the narrative you are selling me.
Exactly. It does not ring true in my architecture, therefore I'm not buying it. You cannot be manipulated into virtuous ignorance when you understand that true faith is a rigorous form of knowing.
The abstract explicitly states that restoring this precision protects the vital boundary between the empirical and the non-empirical.
It ensures that neither domain tries to falsely dominate or erase the other.
It keeps empirical science from crushing the human soul, and it keeps spiritual or emotional realities from ignoring the laws of physics.
I want to take all of this high-level philosophy and bring it right down to the ground into the listener's living room.
Let's do it.
We've talked extensively about epistemology, cognitive structures, societal manipulation, but let's explore how this friction plays out in our most intimate daily interactions.
Because it does, every single day.
Because the framework we're studying explicitly notes that reframing faith in this way deeply clarifies interpersonal conflict.
This is perhaps the most practical, transformative application of this entire deep dive.
This raises a vital question about how we attempt to resolve differences in our marriages, our friendships, our workplaces.
Because most of our deepest conflicts are not actually disagreements about facts.
They are collisions of entirely different epistemological languages.
Yes.
Think about the most frustrating argument you've had recently, the kind of fight that goes in circles for hours where you feel completely exhausted and desperately misunderstood.
We've all been there.
Let's construct a scenario based on this framework. Imagine person A and person B are in a long-term relationship. Person A has had a direct encounter with a non-empirical truth about the relationship.
Maybe it's a deep, intuitive realization that the dynamic has become subtly toxic.
Or a profound knowing that they are drifting apart in a way that is structurally damaging.
Let's track the mechanics of this. Person A knows this truth. They have synthesized thousands of micro-observations, a tone of voice, a shift in body language, a subtle withholding of affection, and their internal architecture has processed this into absolute clarity.
It possesses internal coherence.
But crucially, this knowledge is non-empirical. There is no single smoking gun event they can point to.
They are holding this profound truth, but they are standing on the edge of the expression gap.
So they try to communicate it. Person A sits person B down and tries to compress this massive 3D emotional reality into 2D words.
They say, I feel like there's this distance between us. I feel like you're subtly dismissing me. Something is wrong.
The translation is inherently sloppy. Because it lacks a shared external reference point, it sounds vague.
It sounds like a passing, unstable feeling.
And here is where the epistemological collision occurs. Person B is operating entirely within the modern, culturally dominant empirical framework.
Because person A has presented a claim, person B demands empirical proof.
Person B wants a spreadsheet.
Right. They say, what are you talking about? Give me 3 specific examples of when I dismissed you this week. Give me a timeline of events. What exact words did I use?
Person B thinks they're being entirely logical, fair, and rational. They're applying the scientific method to a relationship dispute.
But person A cannot provide empirical proof for a non-empirical reality.
They can't.
When person A tries to recount a specific conversation out of context, stripped of the emotional resonance, it sounds incredibly petty. Well, on Tuesday, you sighed when I asked you to pass the salt.
And person B immediately seizes on this and says, are you kidding me? You're starting a massive fight over a sigh. You are being completely irrational and overly emotional.
And that is the exact anatomy of the tragedy. Person B is committing the ultimate category error.
They are bringing a thermometer to measure a symphony.
Yes, because person A cannot cross the expression gap with hard, quantifiable evidence. Person B dismisses their profound internal knowledge as a complete fabrication.
And person A is left feeling completely gaslit. They know what they know. The internal coherence is undeniable.
But because the rules of engagement dictate that only empirical data is valid, they're treated as if they are crazy.
This epistemological mismatch destroys relationships.
It destroys workplace dynamics, too. Like when an employee intuitively knows a project is doomed, but the boss demands a data-driven risk assessment that the employee can't mathematically produce yet.
The profound relief offered by the framework we are studying is the recognition of this exact dynamic.
Simply understanding that the other person might be trapped in the expression gap, that they are holding on to a valid, internally verified, non-empirical truth that they simply cannot translate.
It radically transforms how we navigate human friction.
It completely changes the goal of the conversation. If I understand this framework, when my partner comes to me with a vague, hard-to-articulate emotional reality, my job is not to cross-examine them like a lawyer demanding empirical evidence.
Your job is to recognize they are speaking from the non-empirical domain.
The goal shifts from prove it to me with data to Help me understand your internal coherence. Walk me through the architecture of how you are experiencing this.
It replaces adversarial empirical demands with profound epistemological empathy.
Epistemological empathy. That's beautiful.
Giving ourselves and giving others the grace of the expression gap is a requirement for a complete, functional human experience. The research we've unpacked today concludes by emphasizing this dual reality we all inhabit.
To dismiss non-empirical knowledge, to demand that true faith submit to the scientific method is not to eliminate the non-empirical from the world.
Not at all. The realities of love, the profound weight of goodness, the intuitive recognitions of our internal worlds, these will continue to exist.
And they'll continue to govern our deepest motivations, whether empirical science validates them or not.
To dismiss them is simply to fundamentally misunderstand the nature of consciousness and to rob ourselves of the tools required to navigate the most meaningful parts of our lives.
We must champion empirical rigor in the external world. Build safe bridges, cure diseases, demand data in our sciences.
But we must just as fiercely protect, validate, and trust non-empirical knowledge in the internal, relational, and spiritual domains.
Recognizing the boundary between the two is the key to a coherent reality. We have covered an incredible amount of intellectual ground today.
We really have.
We started by diagnosing the tyranny of the empirical-only mindset, that seductive, that rigid framework that demands everything be weighed and measured to be considered real.
We mapped out the two distinct modes of human knowing.
Validating the profound non-empirical realities that govern our lives through structural internal coherence.
We stared down into the expression gap.
Recognizing the tragedy of how language fundamentally fails to compress our infinite internal worlds into shared syllables.
And finally, we arrived at a deeply precise, fiercely empowering redefinition of faith.
Faith isn't an absence of intellect. It isn't a blind leap into the dark. It is the absolute unyielding presence of understanding that simply refuses to be translated.
It is the courage to hold your ground in the void of the expression gap.
It is a vital framework for reclaiming the totality of the human experience.
Embracing both modes of knowing allows us to be rigorously rational without becoming mechanically hollow.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with something to really chew on as you go about the rest of your week. We started this whole journey by talking about that incredibly frustrating, isolating feeling of having the words completely fail you when you were trying to explain something you know deep down in your bones.
The lunatic feeling.
Right. But let's take everything we've unpacked today and let's flip that frustration entirely on its head.
Okay.
If our deepest, clearest truths, the absolute bedrock of how we experience love, goodness, and reality, are fundamentally untranslatable,
Right.
how much of your own breathtakingly complex inner universe are you experiencing completely alone?
That's a profound thought.
And maybe, considering the sacred, non-empirical weight of that knowledge, is that exactly how it's supposed to be?